Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this conversation between Masuma Faruqi and Professor Jan Rosenkrantz from Luleå University. We're both part of the Resourcing Project. And today we're talking about an interesting aspect of responsible sourcing that doesn't get talked about: product development. Professor Jan, my first question to you would be, we talk about product development, and there's this concept of designing for excellence. What does it really mean when you're doing product development?
Yeah, when starting to design a new product, so then looking, of course, at the engineering, it's that you need to identify the right criteria for your design, and the framework that is nowadays used for a proper product development process is a family of design guidelines or design rules that have different emphasis. So it could be that you want to emphasize on how easy a new product is to be manufactured. You can look at cost. You can look at the question of whether it's easily recyclable or not. So there are different emphasis, and they lead to different sets of design rules.
So, sort of looking at this wheel that we have, if my understanding is correct, what you're saying is any product development, it has to consider costs and assembly and logistics all at the same time, or will different elements of it come in to form one large whole when you're designing for excellence?
No, it's not necessarily that all these guidelines need to be considered. It's depending on the product, of course. So therefore, you don't need to use all these at the same time. But it's, of course, that we have the situation that several design rules are combined in one approach. I mean, the idea is in the end, when you want to design a new product, that you, of course, need to think about the life cycle. So therefore, it's not only the manufacturing, so the production of the product, it's then also later on the question of recycling. So what you do after end of life. And for recycling, you may need to be able to disassemble. So and there are different aspects that come along this life cycle.
So the moment you say life cycle, my non-engineering brain already understands a sustainability term. How is sustainability being included in it, being considered this design for excellence? Is this a new thing? Have they been doing it for years? We just didn't know about it?
I should say that this development of design rules has probably started from another end, so being more technical or function related. But nowadays, of course, there's also a broader view on that process, which means that we include also more or less technical aspects into the design procedure. And this could be that you look into parts as environmental impact from the product and its production process. It could be that you also look into something broader as sustainability. I mean, that's always the question, of course, whether you can consider and quantify all the different dimensions of sustainability. So maybe some parts are not that easy to capture, but there are, of course, ideas nowadays to extend the whole concept.
Okay, so we have a framework.
Yeah.
What happens next? What's the next step for a product designer then?
Yeah. Then, of course, it's when you start with a new product development, there's always the overall process. So meaning that you have in the beginning an idea, you develop a concept, you include that into your business strategy, and then you have the step of product development itself. And of course, then later on, questions of marketing and commercialization. But the product development process is then the point where then also the engineering is coming into the picture. And usually, if you don't have just a sequence of activities, it's nowadays in concepts of concurrent engineering that you try to simultaneously consider different aspects of the product design. And it's also not the way that you just go through that procedure once. It's usually that you have an iterative process, which is depicted in this cycle here, the plan, do, check, act cycles, where we have then the conceptualization, the design and prototyping, and otherwise then analysis, and also then the indications for necessary design changes.
Okay, so if we were to take an example, and I know this is not a new product per se, electric battery vehicles. So this idea of a better battery needs to be designed. If you're doing a designing for excellence, taking into account the sustainability side of it, the marketing people also need to be involved in the product development, people need to be involved in the idea generation people. You're saying it's not a straight line. It's not, okay, one department is done, then you have the second department, then you have the third department.
No, exactly. So this is, in a way, you need to have a multidisciplinary project team to solve this complex tasks. So
and do you feel like we're doing that more and more with some of our projects, or is being a novice in this area, my question is, how common would you feel this approach is? Is this for the real frontier sustainability thinking people, or are you finding it more commonly as a operations tool with companies now?
This product development process, I think this is established, and also it's widely implemented to use concurrent engineering approaches in that. But the question is, of course, what are the criteria that we include, and whether this family of different design for excellence rules is complete or not. And maybe this is something where we now, in the context of materials used in the design and raw materials needed for production of the parts or for the entire product, then also involve the question whether this is material that can be sourced in a responsible way.
Interesting point, because you mentioned the word criteria. Obviously, behind all of these little boxes that we have here, a company, the personnel departments will have different criteria. Does everybody get their way, or do some criteria come above others? Is there a trade-off involved?
Of course, when you think about different material sources, then you will then have an effect on different criteria. So meaning that the material or bill of material that you build up is linked to the manufacturing, it's linked to the procurement, it's linked to the question of recyclability. So we have then several of these criteria that are depending on material choice and material sources, giving different directions. So if you, for instance, take the question of making it aesthetic design could be that you use certain materials and a larger mix of material. You may have different ideas about how to assemble a product, and this could be then leading to different decisions compared to the case where you look into the recyclability. So when you need to disassemble and you need to sort the different materials in order to have then not a material mix any longer.
And I'm guessing even regulations would have an impact on this. So if recycling regulations require that 70% of battery materials need to be extractable at the end of life, the product development team has to build that in from the very start, rather than saying this is going to go to a landfill.
Where we need to consider the important role of engineering when it comes to these questions, because in the design you will define the production process, but also the bill of material. So leading then to certain raw materials that are included, and of course coupled then to the question how much of that can be recycled.
And are these trade-offs? Let's take an example. For example, an electric vehicle, if we will. We know that there are 100,000 materials that go into an electric vehicle, from the leather for the seats, from the plastics for the dashboard, and the actual engineering bit of it. For established products or mature products, do these trade-offs tend to be small? Is it saying, well, I won't put cobalt into my battery, I'll put lithium instead, although I suspect they're both used in batteries. My question is, are we looking at incremental changes in product design within these trade-offs? Or are we looking for an innovation to come in where these trade-offs are much larger within our design criteria?
I mean, it's when it comes to the question of material selection and material diversity in a product, could be small steps, could of course also be larger steps. So, for instance, if you think about replacing steel by aluminium in cars, so this is of course has a bigger effect, and this of course also gives then a shift in the raw material demand for these products.
Okay, so depending on what the ultimate objective of the product development is, we could be seeing large trade-offs as well as smaller additional trade-offs, which together may add up to less material use over time. Okay.
Yeah.
But having been in the resourcing project, we, even as experts, have occasionally used the word sustainability and responsible sourcing. And so far, we've been talking about sustainability and product design for a while. Are there specific considerations we need to think of within responsible sourcing and product development?
Yeah, first of all, I consider that responsible sourcing is part, of course, of sustainable design. And the question is whether this has enough weight nowadays in the whole procedure. So when we look at responsible sourcing, then of course we need to have a view on the entire supply chain of raw materials, and need to be responsible. So in terms of question of environmental impact of whether the production process is done in a proper way when it comes to not only environmental legislation but also working conditions. So we need to look at the entire chain, which is depicted here in this wheel, from starting from the exploration to identify the mineral deposits, the mining, the mineral processing and metallurgical processing, followed then also by steps towards recycling. So if we not only consider primary raw materials, but also secondary raw materials. So this needs to be included, the view on the entire supply chain. And then, of course, particularly when we look into secondary materials, but so when we close the loop, we need to keep track of what material we are then procuring and using in our product. And that means that we need to have a certain, need to have, on the one hand, traceability of the material, but of course then also transparency, so that we can judge whether the whole supply chain is responsible or not. So these are not only then things to be considered along the supply chain, meaning that we need to have, as this is done also today now, that we have suppliers we are confident in. It's also that we seen from the product design and the engineering perspective, we need to have also then internal organization and processes in order to establish these criteria of responsible sourcing. So meaning that in a development team for a new product, we need to include people that look into the procurement of raw materials, not only from the cost perspective, but also in terms of responsible sourcing. And of course, it's also then, if you want to come then to a final decision about material selection and so on, that you need to have some metrics where you can quantify and then decide on metrics instead of only some qualitative description.
Jan, I have to admit, I like the diagram and I like what you're talking about, but there's a part of my brain going, mineral supply chains in themselves are complex processes. Then, because a large way how our manufacturing works, small parts are produced by other people. And so there's also a complex supply chain that in itself goes into the making of most manufactured products. And so I see two issues, and one is positive, one is negative. The first one being correlating all of these supply chains and seeing what's happening is an immensely difficult job. On the other hand, if you designed from the very beginning for responsible sourcing, it would be easier to monitor and certify a final product. Am I right in my second assumption that if you designed with responsible sourcing in mind, it would make life easier rather than more difficult?
Yeah, it's of course if you are able to maybe also simplify the supply chains, that could be one objective in the whole thing, that you by smart selection of certain materials already make later processes easier and more transparent. So this is of course one option that you have, and this is linked then to different approaches to become more responsible in the sourcing. So this leads then to questions whether do I have the chance to substitute material? So meaning that we may find a different material that is less problematic in the sourcing, so maybe not coming from certain regions of the world where environmental aspects are not having the same weight as we have it maybe in Europe. So we have also then the question to answer, is this done in a simple way? So do we keep the same performance of the product, or is it then also a trade-off between the performance and the responsible sourcing? So this could be one aspect. Otherwise, we can, of course, taking the same material, think about different sources, but maybe we need to pay for that if we change the source, so making the product more expensive. Is this something that can be conveyed also to the customer?
Yeah.
And then we have other approaches where we might use or able to use recycled materials, reused parts. So also becoming then more not responsible and also resource efficient in that sense that we of course use material again. And another aspect I see is that of course responsible sourcing and maybe the insight that certain materials cannot be sourced in a responsible way today. This may also lead to the question whether we need to do more innovation, find new materials that are then more disruptive, probably, in the whole design.
But this brings us back to where we originally started of what are you designing for? And so the idea of designing for responsible sourcing in the initial framework is a step forward in business models and how we approach material use in our consumer products or manufacturing products.
Yes.
Okay, what will it take to make this happen? What do we need to think about? Because I from my experience, I know this is it's not a framework in common use at the moment. How do we make this happen? What's the way forward?
Yeah, I guess to promote this idea, to start defining rules and criteria that build up such a framework for responsible sourcing.
Okay.
That maybe there's probably there's an overlap also with other design guidelines already existing, but it's, I guess, the combination of that that can make the difference.
Okay, so we need to design the design framework now in a way.
Exactly. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you, Jan, so much for having this little chat with me. For those of you who want to read the full briefing document, it's available on our project webpage. And if you have any questions or would like to get in touch with Jan directly about product development and the engineering side of responsible sourcing, please send us an email at info@resourcingproject.eu.com. Many thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.